Today we're going to look at a very famous meditation technique from Advaita Vedanta called Neti Neti. Neti Neti is what is called a self-inquiry method. The idea is that you enter into a state of focus and then you ask yourself a question. In this case, the question is, who am I? And Neti Neti is the answer. Neti means not this. So Neti Neti means not this, not this. We will progressively eliminate everything which we are not. This video is not going to be a meditation. We will engage with Neti Neti in an intellectual way. We will understand all the pieces of the argument. So, whether you are familiar with Neti Neti or not, or even if you're not into meditation at all, you may enjoy this discussion. But I will discuss how Neti Neti is to be put into practice as well towards the end. With that said, let's dive in. If you know anything about Advaita Vedanta, you know they don't really like to bother with side quests on the path to self-realization. The recommendation is to cut straight to the heart of the matter and try to realize the truth as directly as possible. So, how do you do that? By contemplating certain statements or questions. This contemplation is what is called a contemplative method or a self-inquiry method. Most self-inquiry methods are not meant to be done rationally. For example, you could just ask yourself, who am I? And simply sit with the question in your mind, allowing your intuition to wrap itself around it. In fact, that is precisely what you are meant to do with other famous self-inquiry methods, such as Tattvamasi or Tattvamasi, which means I am Brahman. That is, you are supposed to contemplate the statement meaning, I am the universal consciousness, or I am the one, the only thing that exists, or I am all there is, or whatever you understand Brahman to be. By the way, if you want to have a better understanding of what Brahman is, and for that matter, what Advaita Vedanta is, you may want to check out my video on that. See the link on the screen. Now, you are meant to just contemplate the statement, I am Brahman, without engaging in any reasoning. Your entire self would align with that knowledge. This type of knowing, all-encompassing, internalized, is called jnana. And having jnana, that you are Brahman, literally means you are liberated, which is called moksha. Moksha is the state of being enlightened. So, Ramana Maharshi, one of the most famous Advaita Vedanta teachers, argued that people should simply ask themselves, who am I? So, who am I was the specific self-inquiry he recommended. His claim is that the contemplation of this question alone would be sufficient to reach enlightenment. Now, I don't know how many people have succeeded with this. It seems to me to be a steep curve there. This technique is simple to describe, but it assumes the person has all the patience in the world to stay there, the conviction not to give up, the ability to concentrate, and who knows what else is required. Respectfully, I think this is probably an extremely hard strategy to follow in practice. As a little aside, I will say that a lot of things that are easy to preach are very hard to execute. So I'm always wary and frankly suspicious when someone tells me, just do this, and insist as if they're telling you the highest wisdom there is. You fail at it, you complain, you doubt, you run into all kinds of problems, and all they tell you is to keep at it. I mean, they're not necessarily wrong. If you can keep at it, perhaps you will figure it out, but I'm not convinced there isn't a better way. Every time I see somebody describing how they insisted and all of a sudden it all made sense, they usually have a good explanation of what fell into place for them. What I mean here is that when the person finally realizes the wisdom of the original recommendation, they can explain why it is wise, why it made sense, and how they managed to align themselves to it. Well then, couldn't the master have helped them with that realization? Couldn't they have made it easier? I find it much easier to see things when I am told what to look for. And so, in this spirit, I will go through the entire argument of Neti Neti as far as it goes from what I can deduce. Neti Neti is an answer to the who am I question. Neti means not this, so Neti Neti means not this, not this. Specifically, we will progressively rule out all the things we are not. And at the very end, we will be left with very little else, thus coming much closer to understanding our true nature. You'll be able to follow the Neti Neti process even if you know nothing about Advaita Vedanta or non-duality or even meditation, because what we're really talking about here is who you are, or more precisely, what you are, as you will see throughout the end. To explore that, you don't need a lot of background, only curiosity for such matters. That said, again, you might want to check out my previous video on Advaita Vedanta if you would like to follow some of the parts of this video that talk about the context of the Neti Neti contemplation. Neti Neti's earliest source is the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which dates from between the 9th and 6th century BCE. This is one of the oldest Upanishads, one of the most philosophically dense as well. It appears when Yajnavalkya is teaching about the nature of the self, the Atman, and Brahman. Yajnavalkya was one of the most brilliant and radical sages of the Upanishads. He was a real person who existed. He shows up mainly in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, where he's constantly debating other philosophers and usually winning. He taught using intense, no-nonsense reasoning, which is what we're going to do here, and he's the one who really pushed the idea that the true self, the Atman, is pure awareness, which I'll talk more about in the end. A lot of what we now think of as Advaita Vedanta starts with Yajnavalkya. Now, it is not clear that Yajnavalkya invented Neti Neti, since the Upanishads reflect a lot of knowledge that had been transmitted orally throughout the centuries. Possibly, it is related to much earlier Vedic practices. For example, in the Rig Veda, which is the oldest of the Veda, it dates to 1500 to 1200 BCE, we already see this kind of apophatic inquiry, which is the definition of something by exclusion, by determining what something is not. For example, the creation hymn starts with, "There was neither non-existence nor existence then. There was no realm of air, no sky beyond it. What covered it? Where was it? In whose keeping?" And this kind of definition by exclusion and withholding can be seen in other hymns as well, like the Kahymn, the hymn of mystery, the Purusha Sukta, which are among the most interesting parts of the Rig Veda. Now, Advaita Vedanta was crystallized by the work of Shankara, the whole name is Adi Shankaracharya, in the 8th century. Well, Shankara did adopt Neti Neti and refined it in his commentaries of the Upanishads. He interpreted Neti Neti not just as a philosophical idea, but as a practical method of contemplation. Still, this kind of direct contemplative use wasn't widely emphasized in mainstream Advaita teaching until the end of the 19th and first half of the 20th century, when teachers like Ramana Maharshi, Siddharameshwar, and Nisargadatta Maharaj brought it back as a living method of self-inquiry. Neti Neti, as I mentioned, is a form of apophatic inquiry, a way of finding the true self not by defining it, but by eliminating everything it cannot be. In Western philosophy, this is somewhat comparable to negative theology, where God is defined by what it is not, like in Plotinus, Pseudo-Dionysius, Meister Eckhart, John Scotus Eriugena, Maimonides, and even some strands of Sufi and Kabbalistic thought. However, Neti Neti is not about the nature of God or Brahman, it is about the nature of us. With that in mind, let us walk through the entire process of Neti Neti. We start with the question, who am I? We start with our titles and attributions. We might think, I am John or I am Emily. I may think I'm Carolina. But that's actually a strange way to define ourselves. You're not your name. Your name is just something people use to get your attention. It is a label others use to refer to you. If you had a different name, that name would still serve the same purpose. You would still be you. I would still be me. So clearly, we're not our names. In fact, we could change our names and who we are would still be the same. We could feel differently, but we would still be ourselves. Maybe you try to describe yourself a little more specifically. You might say, I'm American, or I'm an engineer. I might say, I'm a professor. Although these things are true labels, they do not explain who we are. We're going after the core here, and these are things we say about ourselves. They're descriptions of our social roles, not who we actually are. To see this, ask yourself, where in you is your nationality? Where is your profession? American is something that has meaning in a social context. Professor is what I do for work. These are titles and labels, not the essence of what we are. And if you were no longer an American or no longer an engineer, you'd still be you. If I stopped being a professor, I would still be me. In fact, people change professions and even nationalities all the time, and they don't stop being themselves. If your country took away your nationality or your professional organization took away your title, you could be very upset, but you will not suddenly be someone else. So maybe you think, okay, I must be my physical body. That has to be me, right? But let's look at that. Take your hand, for example. If you lost your hand, would you stop being yourself? No, you would still be you. So clearly, your hand isn't you. And we can do this with any non-vital part of the body, like a leg or an arm. You can lose any of them, and people do, and they are still themselves. But let's go further. What about a vital part, like your head? Seems more promising, but let's look closely. If you lost part of your face, would you stop being you? No. In fact, there are people who lose large parts of their face and they're still themselves. Okay, what about the brain? Maybe I am my brain. What if you lost part of your brain? Now that feels more serious. But let me ask you this. If we started removing parts of your brain, yes, you could die. But when exactly would you stop being you? The same argument goes for any vital organ like your heart or your liver, but let's focus on the brain. We could take out parts of your brain that would cause your personality to change, your abilities might change, and we'll talk about those in a second. But the question is, what is the border? What is the line, the region of the brain where if I removed anything outside of it, you still be you, but the moment I cross that line, you're no longer you? There's no such border. We do know that removing too much of the brain will kill you, and we know there are small amounts of the brain that can be removed without ending your life. But there's no precise, identifiable line where one more neuron is the difference between alive and dead. And the question here isn't what can kill you, is what can define you. We've already agreed that you're not your brain because you can lose parts of your brain and still be you. But that raises the question, are you some part of your brain? The answer here is the same. If you think you are your amygdala or your prefrontal cortex or your insula, then the question to ask is, can I remove a piece of it and you still remain you? The answer is yes. You can remove cells of the amygdala, of the prefrontal cortex, and of the insula, and you would still be you. Again, if we remove too much, you would die at some point. But where is the border? Which neuron is the one that has the you-ness in it? Let me slow down here a bit. It's pretty clear by now that we're not any particular part of the body. Most of the cells in your body get replaced over time. They're not that different from the clothes you wear. You put your clothes on and you change them when needed. In the same way, you wear your cells and they too change as needed. So you are not your replaceable cells. Some cells can't be replaced, like most neurons and some of the cells in your eyes, your ears, and your heart. But even those can die and you still be you. In fact, many of them do die. Neurons die from sleep deprivation, alcohol, smoking, junk food, anything that causes chronic inflammation, lack of physical activity, loud noises, too much sun. All of those can kill our irreplaceable cells. Yes, I'll admit this makes me a little anxious. But the reality is, we lose these irreplaceable cells all the time, and yet we remain ourselves. Any one of them can die, and nothing fundamental changes. There's no special queen bee of the cells where if that one dies, you're suddenly no longer yourself. They can die, and you're still you. So if we're not our replaceable cells, and we're not our irreplaceable cells, then we're not our bodies. The property of you-ness is not in your body. You are not your body. You are something else. And now we ask, are we our mind? So let us consider not the physical aspect of our brain, but the mind as an abstract concept. Are we our thoughts? No, because thoughts come and go. One moment I think one thing, the next moment I think something else. There's no real continuity in thought that can define who I am. Think about it. Yes, I know, a bit ironic asking you to think about whether you are your thoughts. But still, you may have certain thought patterns that repeat a lot, but you're not those thoughts. If you were to train your mind to stop having those thoughts, you'd still be you. And the same thing goes for emotions. You're not your emotions. Your emotional state can change completely in a matter of seconds, and yet you remain the same person. So the you-ness can't be in your emotions either. Okay, but maybe the you-ness is in the set of thoughts and emotions that make up your personality. That does seem like something central, something that defines us. But no, you're not your personality either. And you know how I know this? Because while it's not easy, we can change our personalities. Someone can go from being messy to being organized, from a hoarder to a minimalist, from a pessimist to an optimist. It takes effort, yes, but people do it. In fact, you don't have the same personality you had as a child. Most of us have outgrown certain traits and developed new ones. Maybe you were shy as a kid, or constantly worried about what your friends thought, or prone to crying, and then you grew up and you weren't like that anymore. Or maybe the opposite happened. Maybe you were carefree and cheerful in childhood, and later you became more serious and even gloomy. The point is, personalities change, and yet you're still you. So you are not your personality. And at this point, we start wondering, well, what is left? Memories are left. Are we our memories? It kind of feels like this might be the answer. Memories tell our story, at least the version of the story we know. Your story, according to you, is literally what you remember. So, are you your memories? Well, we can forget things, any one thing, and we're still ourselves. And what if we lost all our memories? It happens. People do lose them, and they're still themselves. Now, you might want to argue with that, but think about it. Yes, your thoughts would change, your emotions, your personality, they'd all change, but we just walk through why those things aren't what you are. So even then, even with no memories, you would still be you. What's lost is what you remember, not the fact that you are still here. Even if the worst of Alzheimer's, when the person has forgotten everything, that person is still there. In fact, we recognize it because we feel sorry for them. We feel sorry because we love them. We recognize a them that is still there, locked into a mind that no longer remembers anything. They are still there. So the memories are not what they are. Let's take a quick breather here to recap because we're going into even more abstract territory. So far, we have established that you are not your labels, nor your body, nor your personality, nor your memories. What else is there in our experience of being alive? Well, our sensations. In other words, what we perceive. And this is a crucial moment. Up to now, we've eliminated every physical part of the body and every aspect of the mind except for perception itself. And perception is a big one. In fact, perception is the source of all duality. Watch out for a future video I'll make on that. But returning to Neti Neti, are we our perception? Maybe we are our perception. In fact, doesn't the sense of self seem like a sense in itself? Isn't it a form of perception? Let's break this down. First, are you any of your physical sensations? Are you the sensations through which you interact with the world? I'm talking about the sensation of touch, of seeing, of hearing, of tasting, and of smelling. And no, you are not those things, because you could lose any one of them and still be yourself. Think of Helen Keller. She could not see or hear from early childhood before she learned any language. She was cut away from most understanding of her surroundings for a while, and yet she was unmistakably herself. Plenty of people live without one sense or another, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently, and they're still themselves. We know people who are blind or deaf or who lost their sense of smell after COVID. Some people even lose the sense of taste, which is much rarer. And in some cases, like spinal cord injuries or diseases like leprosy, people lose the sense of touch. There's even a documented condition called congenital insensitivity to pain and touch, CIP. In very rare severe cases, people with CIP can't feel anything. They don't feel any pain, they don't feel temperature, not even the sensation of touch anywhere in the body. And yet, they are themselves. So clearly, your perception of the world through the senses is not what you are. Let me say that again because it's important. You are not your perception of the external world. Okay, how about your internal perception? That's proprioception. It's a kind of perception that tells you where your body is in space. It's thanks to proprioception that you can type without looking at your hands, that you can touch your nose with your eyes closed, and that you can balance with your eyes closed. Now, many of us cannot do these things, but there is an inherent sense of position we all have that can be used to train these abilities. Well, again, you are not your proprioception. You could lose it and you would still be yourself. In fact, there are neurological conditions, for example, due to sensory neuropathy or certain spinal cord injuries, where people can lose proprioception. A famous case is that of Ian Waterman, who lost his proprioception after a virus damaged the nerves that carry sensory input from his body to the brain. He can only move by watching his limbs, and yet he's still himself. But there is another form of internal perception, and that is interoception. That is the feeling of what's happening inside your body, your heartbeat, your hunger, your breath. You can perceive the inside of your body. In fact, a lot of meditation techniques aim to increase exactly this form of perception, to the point that well-trained yogis can often feel specific organs. But again, you can have no interoception at all, and you would still be yourself. In fact, loss of interoception is tied to dissociation, a common consequence of trauma. People do not feel their internal states, and yet they're still themselves. Paraplegics and quadriplegics usually lose their interoception in large parts of the body. Some do not know even if they have to pee. And yet, every person that ever became a quadriplegic continued being themselves. Their personhood, their self, does not change. Just so we are clear, personalities may change, but the one who became a quadriplegic and suddenly has no more external and internal perception of large parts of their body is still themselves. So no physical attribute, no personality trait, no memory, no sense, internal or external, is who you are. You are something else. In fact, at this point, you are not even a who. What is a person? However you define a person, we are already past this. The body's gone, the senses are gone, the story is gone. Whatever you are not a person. You are not human. In any way we define a human, we have established you are not it. Your essence is not human. What remains? Throughout this process, there has been the continuous presence of awareness, the capacity to observe. What's left after all this is awareness itself. You are the one who is aware of what you are aware of. If you have a body, you are the one who is aware of it. If you have a mind, you are the one who is aware of it. If you have senses, you are the one who is aware of sensing. These are all things you may have, but they're not who you are. You are the one who observes. You are the one who watches what your eyes see and your brain interprets. You are the one who experiences what your ears hear and your brain interprets. You are the one who experiences the pain your body feels, the sadness, the happiness. You are the one who is aware. Let me be clear. You are not the body that feels. You are the thing that feels what the body reports. You, the immutable you, your essence, the you that never changes, the one that is here through all the elimination we have done, that you is the one who experiences. There is a problem with words, which is why the word awareness is the best here. When I say you are the one who experiences or the one who hears, there is a potential confusion because your body hears and your body experiences. So are you your body? No. The problem is that the words hear and experience are not precise enough. There is a faculty of receiving a sensation, that is the body's. There is the faculty of interpreting a sensation and serving an image, a sound, a pain, that is the brain's. But there is another faculty, which is the one of experiencing that pain. The body does not actually feel the pain. The body registered the cut, say. Your brain interpreted the body's signal as pain, and you, the real you, the essential you, felt pain. This is who you are, the one who really experiences. Your body and mind are just tools to interface with experience. They are the ones serving experience. You are the one experiencing it. You are what people call the observer, but even observing carries an idea of seeing, of sensations. The better way to put it is, you are the one who is aware. This is the point where Neti Neti ends. Neti Neti leaves us, as far as I'm concerned, with a complete intellectual satisfaction that we are, at best, our awareness. What's interesting is that the conclusion of Neti Neti is not exactly true. The reality is that you are not your awareness. You are all of awareness, all of it. There is only one awareness, and you are it. Neti Neti still leaves you firmly tied to a sense of self, an idea that there is an I that is separate from others. You are the one who is aware of your experiences. You are the one who watches your movie, and I am the one who watches mine. But there is a lot of more ground to cover from there. That said, the conclusion of Neti Neti is not wrong. It is what is called a conventional or expedient truth. The term Advaita Vedanta uses is Vyavaharika Satya. It's the type of truth that is consistent with experience. So here's how this works. You operate in this world as if you are a human. The world responds appropriately. It is coherent with this idea. So saying that you are a human is a conventional truth. However, as we just saw, it is not really the truth. Well, saying that you are your awareness is a superior form of conventional truth. It is closer to the full truth, which is called Paramarthika Satya. If you want me to do a video on conventional truth versus full truth, let me know in the comments. This is a cool topic which is related to magic, tantra. It's super interesting. My point, though, is that if you operate in this world as if you are your awareness, the world will be coherent with it, and you will have less suffering than if you operate as if you are a human. Moreover, your experience of the world will be more coherent than if you think you're just a human. So, the realization from Neti Neti lands us at a better place. It is a real step in the path, you see. The catch is that just hearing what I told you may convince your intellect, but when I say living in this world as if you are your awareness, I mean living believing you are your awareness with your whole being. Jnana is the term here. If you just go about in the world acting as someone who believes this without actually being aligned with this belief, without having internalized, that's just spiritual bypassing. Nothing good comes out of it. Okay, maybe practicing this stance is not a bad idea. Getting your mind used to the habit of thinking in this way is not a bad idea. You just have to be careful not to confuse thinking that you are your awareness and acting as if you are your awareness with actually being in that state. The issue is that the performance of these states, even the brainwashing into intellectually believing this state and accustoming your thoughts to conform to this state, that can be a form of suppression. If you find yourself saying, nothing exists, nothing is real, living or dying, who cares? Who cares what my life is like? My true self does not care. All of this is actually true, but if you are saying it while not aligned, it will not end up well. I say this in all seriousness. Do not waste precious spiritual growth time in avoidance with spiritual bypassing. Never say that nothing matters when things do matter. If you ever have to remind yourself to say this, it's bypassing. When you truly do not care, you won't have to remind yourself. You will feel no feelings associated with it. If you do not care, you do not care. You don't suffer, but you don't feel pride for being stoic either. And be careful with a fixation on the not caring part. I think it's much better if you can build the courage to care and be able to act in spite of fear, in spite of pain. That is the real strength you should be aiming for. Be careful with detachment. It's a very dangerous skill, one that can do just as much harm as it can help you. Now, I just warned you of this without explaining, and this is yet another example where I can make a video if you're interested. Just let me know in the comments. But returning to Neti Neti, after what I said, you may be thinking, so what is the use of knowing that I am my awareness anyway? It's actually huge. This is because although you can just go the straight way into contemplating the big truths, even Advaita Vedanta accepts a more gradual path. If you want to realize a truth, you can realize it completely at once, but there are 3 classical stages for a more gradual recognition. Again, these are not necessary, but they can be helpful. The first stage is Shravaṇa, which translates to listening. Hearing the teachings allows your intellect to align with some wisdom. If you hear something enough, your cognitive dissonance starts to go down naturally, even if you do not think about the teaching at all. This is why, even in Advaita Vedanta, there is a practice of sitting to receive diksha from a teacher. Diksha translates to initiation, but it is commonly used to mean receiving some knowledge from a teacher. Well, hearing the entire consideration of Neti Neti is a form of Shravaṇa. The next stage is Manana, which means reflection. So, upon hearing these things, you can still use your intellect to consider the argument on your own. Can you reproduce it without referencing it? Can you think of examples? Is there any part of it that is incomplete? Is there any inconsistency? What's really cool about these teachings is that inconsistencies and paradoxes are par for the course. In fact, if you are not confused when studying these matters, you are not understanding much. The more advanced the teaching, the more paradoxical, because we come closer and closer to the limit of the meanings of words. And meaning itself, semantics, and philosophy become very important considerations. Neti Neti is a good starting point because it is not heavy on paradoxes, and it is a fairly complete exercise. You don't have to make huge jumps on your own. When you work with Neti Neti by pondering about it, you increase your alignment with this truth. You have subjected the argument to scrutiny and seen that it holds. Your mind is in full agreement and no longer fights you. The third stage is Nididhyāsana, which translates to contemplation. This is when you then retain the idea in your mind in a state where no thoughts are present. This generally requires you to be in a specific state of awareness called dhyana, which I will discuss in another video. Since this stage is more advanced and requires you to build some skill to do it at all, we will leave it for the future. In the meantime, the 2 other stages, which is the listening to the Neti Neti argument and the pondering about it, are great preparatory steps. In my next video, I discuss the dhyana state, which is fairly necessary for all types of contemplative practices, including the contemplation of Neti Neti. In the meantime, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share our content. Let me know in the comments what you think of all this and whether there is anything you want to see covered. We are still a small channel, so your support is what allows me to continue making these videos. I wish you all the best in this path, and I hope to see you soon on my next video.